Those of you that are here, there's a lot of open space. So like in those airplanes that are half booked, you feel free to just kind of lay down, take a nap. It's the perfect 2 o'clock slot. And compliance is in the name of the presentation. It's conducive for nap taking. I imagine that you guys are here for one reason or another, even if it's just like escape the vendor tables or like just chill out where no one else would be. But I hope that there will be content that you guys can take away from this. I'll talk about objective of this discussion. And I say discussion, I mean that. I'll be taking questions in between. I'm not uncomfortable with that. If you guys want to raise your hand during, if I can't see you because there's light shining in my eyes, and just kind of yell out, and I'll try to field questions as best I can. But just kind of to understand, well, I guess I'll introduce myself. This is my first time presenting here at St. Con. And it's exciting, nerve-wracking. I've never presented in front of such a large room before. And we'll see how that goes. But my name's Adam Wingate. I work at Workfront. And I'm the compliance manager. It's manager by title. I don't manage any people, but manage the compliance processes, a lot of policy. Fun fact, I really geek out about SOC reports. I can't get enough of them, really. I just read them in my spare time. For some really fine reading, check out Amazon's. You'll learn absolutely nothing about their environment. That's like the standard. It's perfect. But in all reality, I do enjoy. I have a passion for compliance. I have a passion for the frameworks that people come up with and seem to continue inventing in order to audit one thing or another and make more money. Just from my background, I worked at Novell. That was kind of my first introduction to technology. When I graduated from Brigham Young University, I went to work for Ernst & Young. They're now called EY, and they're one of what are known as the Big Four accounting firms, but they do IT audits. They provide people SOC reports, and that's what I did all the time. 60, 70 hours a week was just crunching out these SOC reports, so they hold a special place in my heart. I think it's important to post this disclaimer. Compliance is not security, and I don't want anyone to leave here thinking that because they put in place any kind of compliance measures or frameworks that they are secure, because you're not. They can help guide the tools that you might use. They can help instruct, certainly management and customers, more importantly, of the security measures that you're following. But compliance doesn't dictate security, and security actually doesn't dictate compliance. Hi, I'm Adam, and this presentation, I really do want it to be a little bit less formal. I want it to be more of a discussion. I'm going to be following some very specific steps in how to present, and so from my book, How to Present by Adam Wingate, I've got a couple of rules. You really need to move your hands a lot, so you'll be seeing a lot of this up here on the podium. Tons of memes. And that's just a little bit about knowing your audience, you know? I mean, security conferences just full of memes. In addition, you'd need to repeat yourself a lot, just reuse words, even in the same sentence. And talk down to the audience. A platform really helps with that. So being able to really just kind of inform you all of how things work. Then provide definitions to things that you guys could be Googling. I think that hopefully you see some of that throughout the presentation as well. And then quoting yourself. Credibility is key when presenting. Just as far as an agenda, we're going to be kind of reviewing what is DevOps. All right, so the conversation is about managing compliance in a DevOps environment. So we want to see what we want to try to understand what DevOps is, and I say try to understand. There's a question mark. I think we all know why that is a question mark. But I'll go over the problem statement. We're going to talk about compliance scope, what criteria we're going to be addressing here in this conversation, and then talk about DevOps and controls. We'll get into some brainstorming, essentially. What are the challenges of DevOps, and what can you put in place? What can you be considering? What kind of controls can you put in place to help keep developers from rolling code into production without testing it, or developing in production? So then, we'll review our takeaways, and then I'll have a formal Q&A at the end. But again, ask questions throughout, raise your hand. I'll make sure that I get to them. So what is DevOps? It really does feel this way. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. But what does it mean, right? So many organizations are making a shift to DevOps because they feel that it will mean quicker release. The customer will be happier. They're going to have features faster, right? So this rapid release really drives the organization to research and implement some form of DevOps. And DevOps, development operations, you're taking the operations, the people that keep the wheels on, and combining those roles or responsibilities with people that code the applications that work on top of those systems, right? It can be more collaborative, right? That can seem really attractive. It also, it kind of in hand with that rapid release, continuous deployment. People always have that goal when they're moving to DevOps, is always rolling code, right? Always introducing new features. And customers respond to that. They honestly do. The end user responds to that. Rapid release is a benefit of DevOps that people tend to latch on to. It's cheaper in the cloud, right? So if we move to DevOps, we can reduce costs because we could just put everything in Amazon and it's a lot cheaper. Did I mention rapid release? Rapid release, like just getting features out there, repeating yourself in a presentation, it's one of my keys. And then in the end, I can Google it for you. Let me Google that for you. Turns out not even Googling what is DevOps, just DevOps, 4 of the top, like half of the posts were what is DevOps. People answering it, but also asking genuinely, what in the world is DevOps? So now you know. Now you know what DevOps is. But the reality is that if your organization, and by raise of hands, are you in an organization that has or is planning on moving to DevOps? Yeah, so if you've made the shift already and done any research into what DevOps is, there are so many different flavors, and no one goes full DevOps. But in reality, it's difficult. It introduces challenges, and so every organization kind of has to tailor their approach to themselves. And so to introduce the problem, really what we want to cover. A shift in DevOps can introduce risk to the business and its data. Now, I did a spell check, but if you guys see spelling errors, just blame the editor. They probably missed it. This isn't a unique problem, though. And anyone that's ever dealt with risk, compliance, evaluating risk in an organization knows that if you're introducing anything new, it's going to introduce risk. There are challenges. There can be holes opened up in your systems because of these new processes, new systems, new organizational structures. So the real problem, if we distill it down, is that this shift to DevOps will introduce or can introduce risk to the business and its data. As with any organizational shift, then, there are certain processes that are put at risk specifically. So if we're talking about managing compliance, the perspective that I'm going to be coming at this from is security compliance and there are a variety of reports. I didn't include them anywhere in the slide because everyone kind of has their own requirements set by the organization or their customers. So we could be talking about HIPAA, we might be talking about PCI. My personal favorite are the SOC reports, 1, 2, and 3. ISO 27001, an actual certification, right? Even FedRAMP, if you guys are dealing with government entities and they have requirements of you. It was FISMA, used to be FISMA, yeah, now. If you have FedRAMP requirements, if you have to build an ISMS, right? So change management, logical access, physical access, and other IT operations. That's where an auditor will hone in. So that's why those bullets are up here. And you're going to see a lot of things missing from that. And if any of you have ever interacted with an auditor, and I was an auditor, and so I feel I can speak somewhat intelligently to this. If you've interacted with an auditor, they have tunnel vision. So you can lead an auditor down whatever path you choose almost. But they will latch on to certain things that they see or find. It may not have anything to do with your organization, but all of a sudden they thought, oh wait, that seems important to me and it falls under one of my categories and I need to follow up with it. But in the reality of things, it doesn't introduce a lot of risk to your organization or otherwise. But change management, logical access, physical access, and other IT operations such as disaster recovery, monitoring, network security, those are going to be the areas where they're going to focus and where we need to be aware if we're making a shift to DevOps or have made a shift to DevOps of considerations to stay compliant, to keep those controls in place. So the reality, if that's the problem, the reality is that it isn't a new concept. DevOps isn't new. Combining developers with, or giving developers the responsibility of top to bottom control of a system, right? I think back to a company my dad worked for, and they would just basically hand off, they'd say, hey, some vendor came and sold us this new tool. They said, we've got to install it on this, that, and the other, and then he would just hand it off to the IT guy. And the IT guy then built, the IT guy built it, maintained that system. He was the tech support. He was the one pushing patches and updating the system, right? He may not have been the company developing code, but he certainly had some of those change management responsibilities. Patching is change management. So DevOps isn't new. Reorgs aren't new, right? A shift to DevOps isn't unique from a shift to any other kind of fancy, trendy organizational structure. And in the end, risk in general isn't a new concept, and evaluating those risks, measuring those risks, and communicating them isn't new. So then it's really boiling down those aspects of DevOps that challenge the controls that we have in place. So as we go through the rest of this presentation and discussion, I want you guys to think about what is the risk. As we present some of the challenges, some of the areas, control areas, the criteria to security, I want you guys to think about what is the risk, what's the risk to my organization. We'll talk generically about what that could be, but think about what is the risk. Is this in scope? Is this something that would matter to me, that would matter to my company's customers, that would matter to executives in my company? Key to making an adjustment in any kind of reorg is looking for common process. If you can identify similar processes, overlap those for your auditor, help them understand that they're the same. Look, we do steps A, B, and C in both of these processes. Let's just look at them as a similar process. Then you're going to win. That'll be reduced man hours. It will look good to your managers. But finally, we do need to talk about what auditors are looking for. Some of you have interacted with auditors, and some may not have dealt with auditors very much, but I'm not lying when I say they really do hone in on things that may or may not have any consequence in your organization. So what I want to talk about, and this is going to be aligned with the trust services principles. So if you've heard of the SOC 2, It's a control framework that is based on trust services principles. They're established by the AICPA. It's a framework that's definitely more credible. It carries much more weight here in the U.S. than it does internationally, but it's growing. And it developed rapidly on the coast in about 2012. Everyone was asking for one. And now we're seeing, I'm here in Utah now and seeing that a lot of our customers are becoming aware of SOC 2, what's included in it, why it's different than a SOC 1, and why that might be important to them. I didn't choose ISO 27001. I didn't choose FedRAMP just because their control frameworks they tend to be a little more redundant. And it has its purpose, but they're large control frameworks. FedRAMP, FISMA, if you choose a medium risk audit, you're going to be looking at over 300 controls. And you can implement a SOC 2 in your organization with less than 40. So just to give kind of an idea, FedRAMP has requirements. So if that is something that your organization has to follow, make sure you get a consultant or make sure you understand exactly what is needed. They're going to be pointing you to NIST all the time, saying you have to be doing 7-pass, you have to be smashing those hard drive into bits. But I've built this conversation of common control criteria on SOC 2, Trust Services Principles. So the controls that they are then recommending and testing on to provide this SOC 2 report have to do with these topics. The first is organization and management. So when an auditor is evaluating a company, they're auditing for security, right? The trust services principles include other criteria that aren't just security, but right now we're talking about security. Organization management, they want to know that it's a top-down approach to security in your organization. They want to know that it's the executives that are communicating these requirements, that they're encouraging people to have strong passwords, that they're saying, yes, encrypt your hard drives because we care about the data that we're protecting. So we see that often they're called entity-level controls or entity-level safeguards, and these are overarching principles in your organization. Does your HR do background checks, right? And we don't think of that as security per se, but in the compliance world, if an auditor is evaluating, or a customer, because they're representing the customer, if they're evaluating your organization for security, they want to know that you have the right people coding, that you have the right people that have access to their sensitive information. So they want to know, are you doing background checks? How often? Are you doing security training annually or at whatever frequency, right? And what all does that include? So their organization and management is the first criteria in security for an auditor. Communication. So not only having those overarching security standards, but also that you're communicating them internally, your employees understand, at any time, they know where they stand in this whole machine of protecting information, right? They can have access to all of the policies that they would need to have to do their job. That customers would understand also, that you've communicated to customers what the boundaries of your system are. How far is too far, right? That you have terms of use, that you have some kind of NDA in place, that you're reviewing those, right? That these things are communicated. If you have an incident, how do you inform your customers, right? So communication is the second criteria. The next couple, risk management and controls. This one is my absolute favorite. And but are you performing a risk assessment? Is it real? Right? Is it real? Are you presenting that to management? Are you able to communicate risks down? So that's often where we find the risk. We find them on the low level. We find that someone has root access or a backdoor into an application. But once we do the risk assessment, we find, yeah, we've got this vulnerability, we communicate that up. Are we helping the organization get better? Are we using that risk assessment to implement actual security, right? And controls are just a way of helping to enforce. It's just a way of measuring for your users what they should or shouldn't be doing. It gives you a chance then to check, to make sure, see where you're at. A control is just a necessary evil in this whole compliance machine. but they definitely result from the risk assessment. If you find you have a hole, implementing a control might be a way of mitigating that. Along with this, hand in hand is monitoring then those controls. Putting them in place doesn't do a whole lot unless you monitor and enforce the controls that you've established. Yeah?
So you mentioned, so monitoring is really important in all of these things. If you were to take something like password policies, like we were just barely talking about, and you say anytime you're using kind of a corporate password, it must fit this type of criteria.
Yep.
How do you monitor that for, say, like third-party sites or something?
No, that's a great question. So the question was, if you have some control that you've established in your organization, and correct me if I get this wrong, but if you've established some criteria, you want your employees to follow this, and then you adopt a third-party solution, some kind of SaaS provider maybe or vendor, what can be done to ensure that you're enforcing that for those vendors as well, right? Is that, depending on the framework that you follow, your auditor may also audit them or your use of that software. A good example is ADP. A lot of organizations are using ADP to process payroll. It often becomes in scope because of the amount of money that's coursing through its righteous veins. And so an auditor will ask you as the organization, have you evaluated ADP? Are you following your own policy? Does ADP provide you the opportunity to set your own passwords in the application? And then they're going to include that, wrap that up into the audit. And not to, I mean, it's our, this is funny to them, not to bore anyone, but it really would only be in scope if it's financially significant. Doesn't mean that it's not a best practice. Salesforce is another, that may be a better example, right? A lot of sensitive data or customer data goes through Salesforce. In your organization, do you know, are you aware of the password settings on the Salesforce instance? It's a question that you should be asking yourself. Does it matter, right? It absolutely does. If you have a password policy, should you not then hold your vendors to a similar policy? Workfront, we develop software. Within the tool itself, we allow customers to set those parameters. They can set their own password policy. So it seems easy enough to just kind of wash our hands and say, just make sure you have strong password policies. You can set it up however you want. And a lot of vendors are that way. You'll find the majority of those SaaS solutions are going to be that way. But yeah, as a compliance organization then, you certainly want to establish a vendor review process. And we're going to talk about that specifically. But yeah, so that you can know if people in your organization are going outside of that password policy. Logical access, physical access. This is kind of standard across the board. It's something that we often take for granted. I really do believe. Social engineering is the way into an organization, just through the people, and this is the gate, right? So protecting the logical access of systems and the physical access of your facilities and resources is absolutely key. Auditors are going to hone in on that. It's easy for them to do. You're going to invite them to your company at some point. They're going to walk through the front door. They're going to be looking around like no one asked for my ID, right? So as long as and you don't have to check IDs, but as long as you have mitigating controls, as long as no one's coming, not just anyone is coming in and picking up a laptop in your company, then. But along with logical physical access, you can consider encrypting devices, right? Protecting those resources, those assets. For logical access, a lot of times we want to just think about the usernames and passwords for systems. And you know, it may be important, and auditors can look at system-level access. So they may start asking questions about, well, we noticed, yeah, you gave us the Etsy password. Yes, here are the users. We understand that. We've gone through. There are DBAs. This is all appropriate. What about these system accounts? Do you know anything about these system accounts? And if you're humming and hawing, you know, then that will give them an opportunity to dig deeper. Even though it may not matter, this could be some API into your payroll system so that you can actually pay your employees something that's necessary, right? They may start diving down this hole. So understanding not only user access and passwords, but system accounts and how they're accessing your systems can be key. Yeah.
So sometimes if you move more towards DevOps, that list of users on the system increases.
Yep.
What are good ways to manage that?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Help the assessor get comfortable with that.
Absolutely, fantastic question, and it is a slide. So we'll tackle that. The question was about that access list tends to grow in a DevOps environment, and what are some of the things that we can do about that? So yeah, we will get to that slide certainly. System operations. This can be kind of a blanket at times, but supporting systems. It can pose substantial risk to information security. So are you patching your systems? Do you have appropriate business continuity in place? Right? That's something that auditors are going to look at. They're going to key in on. How many of us really think of backups as security, though? Right? So we're still talking about common security criteria for an auditor. How many of us think of our backups as something that we may have responsibility for as a security professional, right? Well, is that backup protected? If we say we're encrypting at rest, are we encrypting our backups at rest? Who has access to our backups? Where are they being stored? Are we doing tape? When we drive that tape to the tape storage facility, who's going with that vehicle? Or what times a day are we doing it? Or, right, do we have the proper protection? So we absolutely should be considering backup when we're looking at the security of our systems, of our data, of our environments. Finally, change management. Another subject that I'm really passionate about, along with risk management, is change management. we can break everything right here. We just ruin it all. All it takes is some fat fingers, really, and then hitting enter, merging that branch, right? So cloud applications, systems supporting them, they can experience constant innovation, and in a DevOps environment, even more. Right? So how you manage change management is going to be key. There's some additional control criteria that's part of the SOC 2 framework, so you can elect to also have an auditor test you for availability controls, confidentiality, availability, right? Especially if you're a SaaS solution, this is generally the number 2. If anyone's doing a SOC 2, they're usually doing the common criteria, which you have to do, security, and availability. Right? Customers care. You put SLAs in place, so why not give them an idea of that uptime, the systems that are there to support that uptime, right? Help them be comfortable. They're asking for it. I guess we don't have to give them anything, but confidentiality, protecting that information. Data integrity, so the accuracy of that information, inputs and outputs, you're measuring them to make sure that they're on par. And finally, privacy. Privacy is actually one that is hardly ever adopted, surprise, in the United States. We really don't like it. We don't like talking about it, I mean. We love privacy. We don't care about it, but we love it. And it's not really a conversation. We found this out, I guess we've always known, right? But Safe Harbor is an agreement that the EU had with the US in export and import of data. Right? They wanted to make sure that their EU citizens, that their information is secure and protected and not being looked at by anyone that it shouldn't be, anyone other than the agreed party. So we had Safe Harbor in place. As we know, a student who came to Santa Clara University filed a class action suit, or filed a suit against Facebook. The ruling was from that Safe Harbor is no longer in effect. Right, so we can't use Safe Harbor as a protection. I would this is a caveat, this is kind of beside this discussion, but make sure that your organization, you're going to be getting those questions. What are you doing? Safe Harbor's gone. What's going on? Safe Harbor was Article 28. Consider Article 29. You can Google that. Also, model contract clause. Essentially, Safe Harbor was a blanket, and we need to have one-to-one agreements with those entities, right? If we have a breach, they need recourse, and so that's what that's all about. But privacy has to be a concern of ours, whether we test for it or not, and I would encourage you not to. Right now, the AICPA is rewriting their privacy criteria. So they issued criteria in 2012 for all of the other controls except privacy. 2012 was the first update since 2007. And in 2012 they said, well, we're ready with everything else, but privacy's just ugly. We're going to hold on to that one. So yeah, anyway, but we need to be considering it. There's only one cover-all. So when we look at these frameworks, when we look at solutions, there's really only one cover-all, and that is Lorenzo Cain, the center fielder for the Kansas City Royals. He will cover everything. Everything else we need to be looking at as in order to address specific risks. We can't have a blanket. There's no blanket compliance report. There's no blanket solution in security, right? We can't just, we've got a firewall, so we're safe, right? Only Lorenzo Cain can cover everything, and there's only one of him, and right now he's busy. So now what we're going to do, let's dive into each of these topics. Let's put them in the context of DevOps, and let's brainstorm some of those things that we need to be considering. So what could be a solution to the potential challenges that are introduced in a DevOps environment? So organization and management, and I don't know, how big is that? I bet people in the back probably can't read that. I'm not sure if DevOps is about collaboration or just ops losing responsibilities, right? So organization and management, who's your new advocate? In a shift from non-DevOps to DevOps, this may not apply to a startup, right, that just starts as DevOps, but a shift to DevOps, you need to know who you're talking to. Who are you reporting to? What does the organization now see as requirements and compliance and even security? It can result in merged technical leadership roles. You may find that you no longer have an advocate directly, right? Or they don't speak your language. The people that you now have to talk to about compliance requirements, they may or may not see value in it. So definitely can be a challenge as a direct result from that. If they don't see value, there may not be budget for it. I really appreciated the keynote that was given by the CISO from University of Utah. He mentioned that as far as scope, priorities, we need to be ready to communicate to management. We need to be ready to fight for those budgets. We need to have the relationships developed, right? And I think that we should consider that. What can be done in order to communicate those risks to management and process owners? If your new manager doesn't speak your language, then translate it for them. Give them graphs, give them charts, diagrams. We may think that that's rudimentary. We may think that's beneath us, but it's certainly an ability, or it certainly provides us an opportunity to learn. It provides us an opportunity to understand the new business that we're a part of. So just as an example, graphs or charts, right? Here's percentage of budget that you receive or that it's approved versus the hours that you spend on LinkedIn per day. So if you have, let's say 100% of your budget, you may not spend any time on LinkedIn. 90%, you see it goes up. It plateaus a little bit at like 5 hours a day. If you're getting no budget, then there's no point. You're doing something wrong, so why even look on LinkedIn? That's just my assumption from the data. The data, it's science. I made this all up. I hope no one ever thought that this was real. So, heat maps, this is really, it actually can be super valuable. So along with heat maps in your risk assessment, putting some intelligence behind it. Likelihood versus impact, right? Understanding where you're at risk, seeing it visually can help. You'll be surprised. You will find benefits from running a risk analysis. So here we have, maybe higher risk of breach, lower, I don't know. These are just, feel free to use those graphics. They're open license, so I don't know if they are. I shouldn't say that. Diagrams or reports, right? Presenting to management what our security inventory is. What do we have in place? There was a chart presented yesterday in that same keynote that was Again, it seemed really rudimentary, but from the ground up, what's our foundation? What the tools do we have in place to address our known risks or risk categories? And then keep calm and do a risk assessment and really own it. Really dive in. You should not be, if you're a security professional, you shouldn't be the only person involved in a risk assessment. If you are a compliance professional, you shouldn't be the only person involved in a risk assessment. Make sure you are polling the audience. Make sure you're understanding, you have input from different parties, especially in a new organization or a new organizational structure. So if we're talking about communication, responsibilities then related to communication, these are critical to both IT and development. Right? So this is the reality. The implementation may push for a common process. Right? So if I'm a developer and I've got some strategic, we're changing data center locations, we're also rolling out these new features, why not do that in one blast, right? So instead of having our PMs just communicate the fun little new features and then having IT or operations communicating the infrastructure changes, they may want to merge those processes. And the reality is, the only challenge, or one of the few challenges to that, roles and responsibilities related to these may not be defined. So if the business then has an expectation that you have a common process, or that we don't flood our customers with spam about these updates, right, that we learn that. And so that would be my advice, something to consider, understand and illustrate your communication requirements. A good example is incident management. If an incident occurs, a security incident or a performance incident, whatever you're responsible for, if an incident occurs, what's your communication plan? Have that communicated to management, make sure they understand. Risk management and controls. Again, I don't pretend to know everything about managing compliance in a DevOps environment, but I will say that neither DevOps or operations, neither development nor operations owns risk. They are not the end party. The buck does not stop there. You may not feel that way. The pressure may be on you and your organization to implement, to manage that risk, but you certainly don't own it. Follow the dollar, really. Finance owns the risk. And we need to be educating our customers about what they can and can't expect. That is our responsibility. We're the ones that know the technology, that have set up the systems, that maintain them. But you don't own the risk. It doesn't mean that you can't advise, because you certainly see the risks, right? Especially if you are doing a risk assessment. Then communicating those risks becomes even more important. So in risk management and controls, look for common process. I'm repeating myself. That was one of my keys. I said that again. So common processes like change management. In an operations process, you might see the change request comes in, it's approved, I implement it, right? A switch needs to be replaced, submit a ticket, take it out, put a new one in, right? Done. In development, it can look a little longer. But you need to be ready to establish this common process so that an auditor can understand, we're DevOps, but it doesn't mean that you don't want to add additional work. You don't want to add additional questions. And so helping an auditor understand that these are common processes is important. A request comes in, it needs to be authorized. An authorized request now needs to be developed and tested. Once tested appropriately, once it passes those tests, it is formally approved, and then another party or responsibility then releases that code, right? There is a concept that an auditor finds sacred, and it is segregation of duties. It's fraud protection. So in this process, building in at least different responsibilities will be critical. Small shops, this can be a large challenge. Finding someone else that can authorize or approve, that can have sufficient understanding to be able to approve, right? That they know the lines of code that were changed. That can be a challenge. But it's something that I would encourage anyone moving toward DevOps or starting in DevOps, look for those common processes. You don't just need to submit change tickets for code changes, right? So if you're in AWS, you need to make a new security group, or you should be able to if something were to go wrong, you as an organization would want to be able to find out, what did we change, what was different yesterday, how can we fix it, right? Access management, it's another example. An access request might come in, you have different systems, development, you may be managing their access through LDAP, they don't have control, that will change in a DevOps environment. Then monitoring, the monitoring of these controls, combining development operations, roles and responsibilities, again, they may not be considered. One of the big challenges here is, if I've given developers the responsibility or the ability to start a service from the ground up, they throw together a system on whatever platform, how do I know that it can be monitored? If I have Nagios, or if I'm using any other tool, if I'm using Puppet to manage configurations, or I need to observe those systems. If they can put anything together, I've lost control. There is no control in place. So if you see a shift to DevOps, one of the considerations is developing and enforcing standards. Standards regarding system requirements, parameters, they'll prevent holes in scope of your compliance and control activities. So a gold standard, a gold image, critical in helping to ensure that you don't lose controls around monitoring your systems and enforcing those protections. Now let's talk about access. Access is huge. Yeah, right. So in a shift, I've had an experience in a shift to DevOps. The next day, we had a request from a developer for access to the database. The next day, it was like somebody died and they were already asking for their couch, right? And I'm really bad with analogies, so I should have prefaced with that. But open all the things. This can be the DevOps implementation, and often is. Open all the things. That presents absolutely no challenges to the organization. Just open it, make sure there's a ticket, and they'll be fine. No, that's not true. Yes, make sure there's a ticket, but you've got to think through with the organization. They need to be on board. They have to understand the risks. Make sure you can communicate them to the appropriate parties. So it doesn't do any good to just say no. Right? They come to you, they say, give me database access. I need to have the conversation. Why do you need database access? So from a compliance perspective, if you have a ticket and it tracks that request was authorized, it was reviewed and approved by the appropriate party, the system owner, then actually an auditor would come in, they'd include it in their sample, they'd check it off, that looks good, they would ask probably little questions about that. But if they really wanted to dive into appropriateness of the access, that's where you need to have had that conversation. You need to be prepared to say, yeah, well, he actually is responsible for the performance of our application. He's a developer, but his role is performance. So he needs to be monitoring tables. He needs to see how long queries are taking. He needs that. So being able to have those conversations is really important. Before opening those access floodgates, working with management, outlining what your approach is going to be, outlining certainly the compliance requirements. They have to know that anytime this happens, they're going to need to submit a ticket, maybe, right? But understanding within your scope, they are going to need to have some record that this was approved, that we said, yes, they can have access to customer data. These are requirements. They're requirements that you want to hold as an organization, but that you may have to hold, that customers may be holding you to. Then more complex than that, than just having the ticket, the record, is how do you maintain that segregation of duties? If a developer can now write and roll their code, what mechanism do you put in place to check that? To make sure that we trust our developers, honestly. We all trust our developers, but we all make mistakes. Even we make mistakes in configuring systems or setting up security parameters or configurations or in writing controls. We all make mistakes. So what can we do to make sure that doesn't impact the customer? What check can we put in? Peer review is key. A lot of large organizations that I've been in testing their DevOps for change management and logical access, they have peer review in place. And so while, yes, we say a developer has access to roll code, they're going to be triggering that. There is a mandatory logical review that happens of that code from one of their peers who may have the same responsibilities, right? But in that case, they are not the developer rolling code and developing. There are ways to manage that logical access. And if there's any more questions about that, be happy to field those. System operation. Certainly a challenge in DevOps. Each team owns and manages their own system from top to bottom. They get to determine how to set that up. If you were in here for the last presentation, I guess I only caught the last slide, but it looked like it was about Docker. Docker is fantastic, right? And have you heard, I heard you like Docker. There's a Docker for your Docker. There actually is a Docker for your Docker, so this meme is for the guy that wrote Docker for Docker. He had a use case. I don't know what it was, but he had a use case to put Docker in Docker. DevOps, then, the challenge by deviating from, again, standard platforms, coding languages, access mechanisms, protocols, storage, etc., you're exposing yourself to additional risk, breach, outage, misuse, right? So if you're telling people, yeah, you can set up your own system wherever, just make sure it works, serves the customer, that you're rolling all the time, they're going to go grab, it'll be PHP, Ruby on Rails, in some kind of, NoSQL data, I don't know what, and there's no standard, you can't monitor it, you can't control that. So again, we're talking about making sure that you provide anyone that has these responsibilities with automated tools to implement a system, right? If they need a server spun up, they click a button. That will help a developer. Certainly if the developers are leading DevOps, that'll help a developer stay in compliance when they need to spin up a new service. Change management, rapid release. This can mean deploying code directly to production. Hopefully it means in some kind of canaried release process, right? So you have different levels of production environments. And honestly, auditors understand that, right? To some degree, not to some degree, they can't dictate the way that we operate, the way that we do business. There are best practices. There are smart and secure ways of doing it. But the joke is always made like, what is the Dos Equis guy? I don't always roll code, but when I do, or I don't always develop, but when I do, I develop in production or something like that. A lot of developing in production it's not unique, and people do it. And so then what are you going to do? What are you putting in place? Consider understanding authorization, execution, approval, testing, deployment, right? Making sure that those pieces are in place, that you have a strong mechanism for protecting your customers through this process, right? If something breaks, you have a way of putting them in an environment that isn't broken for the time being, right? That you're doing it in some kind of canaried. And a canaried is that, and does everyone understand? You got the canary, he'll die if something's wrong in the mine. So, you have this canary to put, you put in that mine, the gas. If it doesn't kill the canary, then keep pumping that gas. Understand that those pieces are integral in change management. You have to maintain them. But it can be done in DevOps. As I said, even in releasing to production. So peer review becomes really important. Developers understanding requirements for their systems, not just the code, right? The application they're developing on, but knowing something about the systems that those applications are running on will be key. And not only submitting tickets for changes, for code changes. And I've said that already. I'm repeating myself, but submitting tickets, having tickets approved for changes to their AWS environment or whatever, wherever it's hosted, if they're switching blades in the co-location facility, I don't know, but making sure that you're tracking and managing that. Right, so it seems like if we get into some of those additional criteria, availability, availability is easy. Customers are complaining about performance. DevOps is a solution for that because we just go to the cloud. Here's the DevOps. Where's my AWS account? Right? That can be like a knee-jerk reaction. Implementing cloud infrastructure or outsourcing these complex, cumbersome, seemingly costly processes. The business may look at this and say, CapEx, right? You got to stand up these servers. That's expensive. Moving to more of an OpEx they believe would reduce those costs. Help them understand that. It may be true. It may be true, but your application, you need to know that your system or the applications you're targeting for that shift really are cheaper, right? If they're running some back-end process that keeps that server alive all the time, and you get to the end of the month and you got $12,000 bill, and you're thinking, well, that's bizarre. Didn't expect to spend 6 times as much as we are right now maintaining these systems. Help them understand that, preferably before a shift to DevOps from a non-DevOps. But instruct management that outage risks, there are outage risks with the cloud. Has your Gmail ever gone down? Has Twitter ever gone down? Right? Just because your host, Netflix is a great example, right? That's AWS. Have you ever had problems with Netflix? Has it ever loaded slowly, or have they had an outage? Absolutely. So it doesn't solve, just saying I'm going to Amazon doesn't solve your problems of even redundancy or availability. You need to make sure that you're in separate regions. Opening up new regions has implications on compliance. You're going to have customers that say, I can't have data in the US. So then you have to isolate that, right? So making sure that management understands that it's not as easy as just saying to the cloud is important. Confidentiality. Whenever you're opening access to additional responsibilities, roles, people, you are opening up additional risk. So it's just more attack points, more laptops, more phones that can be grabbed and stolen. And so when we're thinking about considering what we need to have in place in this kind of shift, remind your employees about your key policies around passwords, system boundaries, computer and device use. Enforcing strong authentication is key. 2-factor, wherever you can, 2-factor authentication. Data integrity. I'm going to skip this one because it's really about inputs and outputs, and it overlaps with change management a whole lot if you're thinking about it in a DevOps context. Privacy, third-party tools. If a group, a team, squad, guild, whatever you call them, have the ability to stand up a system from top to bottom, they're going to say, that's shiny, and they say it does what I need it to do, I'm going to use that. Now you're putting data in a third party. And how are you evaluating that? So here we're talking about a vendor assessment. So critical, and your customers will care. They're going to say, yeah, tell us about the security of your app, or tell us about the security of your organization. Great, let me explain that to you. Yeah, everything looks good. Are you putting my data in any third parties? Well, yeah, everyone's putting your data in AWS. Okay, well, have you done an evaluation of AWS? No, but I'm pretty sure they're good. Right? That's not what we can tell customers. That's not what they want to hear. So establishing a mature vendor review is important. My one caveat there is it's not a one-size-fits-all. Again, Lorenzo Kane is the only blanket that covers everything. Other than that, you have to do data classification. You've got to educate your customers. What are you putting in our app? Why is that important to you? And when you're evaluating your vendors, what am I putting in that app? If it's marketing that's just putting maybe internal communications, documents, graphics in Dropbox, are you going to be evaluating that the same as you do your NetSuite that has your GL? You're not, right? So making sure you apply some intelligence in doing that third-party review is critical. It'll save everyone time. It just makes it a better world. We're getting to the end. You're welcome. DevOps, it should not jeopardize compliance. It absolutely should not. Consider the control criteria that we've discussed. Have the conversations with management, and you should be fine in tackling that shift from DevOps or to DevOps from wherever you're at today. But it does include a couple of these key takeaways. I want to bring us back to considering the risk. When you are looking at a control, when you're looking at a system, when you're looking at a change in DevOps. But this process, we really want to do away with this, or someone's asking you for access to some system. Really think about, what's the risk? What is the risk? I don't mean that like, what can it hurt? No, I mean, think about whose data is at risk and how. Find a seat at the table. This is key. This is absolutely key. If you're changing in any reorg, especially in an area where you may have had operations responsibilities, security operations, even if you're application security, make sure you have a seat at the table that you can communicate to your new management, if it is new management, what those security requirements and, pertinent to our conversation, those compliance requirements are, because they are different. Understanding then those requirements will be key in having that conversation. Right, so understanding those requirements, knowing SOC 2, knowing the criteria, is availability on the table, is confidentiality on the table. If it's ISO 27001, do I have an ISMS? Are we reviewing all of these policies and procedures annually, right? Another key takeaway, now you know DevOps, probably better than the guys that are doing it. And that's from, so I think that's probably the most key takeaway. And then to quote myself, because I said I would, DevOps presents no additional risk to your organization unless, of course, you implement it. And then just consider all the things that we talked about before. So I apologize. I really didn't, I did not realize that I would be such like a stage whore, but we have 2 minutes. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have. Feel free to email me, adamwingate@workfront. I didn't post it anywhere because I don't want you to be able to get it. But now, you can tweet it at this point. So, but yeah, any questions? Great. Thank you all. You've been a great audience.